Alrighty, so in the previous video, we talked about three different data types. There are, well, there's more than these, but we've talked about strings, integers, and floats. And strings, they hold symbols without caring about what those symbols represent. Integers actually hold onto numbers and the value that those numbers represent, it holds onto those. Floats work like integers, but they're holding on to the decimal version of it. So let's come over here. So we talked about those. I'm just going to type those really quick in a comment. So strings hold a collection of symbols. Integers hold whole numbers. Floats hold decimal numbers. Now, when you create a variable in Python, you don't need to tell it which type of information it's holding. Often in other programming languages, like Java, for example, you might say something like int x equals 5, and that's telling the program the x variable is only allowed to hold on to integers. And if you try to give it something that's not an integer, it will complain. Python does not ask for the type. A variable can hold an integer to start, and then it can switch over to be holding a string, and then you can switch it again to hold a float. It doesn't care in terms of like, any variable can hold anything, but it does matter when these different types of data try to interact with each other. If you try to have an integer interact with a string, sometimes it gets a little messy. It doesn't quite work. So the first thing that I'll mention is by default, the input command. So if I say name equals input, what's your name? By default, the input command gives you a string. Whatever the user types in, it's going to hold it as a string by default. So we say, what's your name? And I say Adler. Well, we also should probably print out name. Otherwise, we're not going to see an output. It will be fine with that, right? It's holding the string Adler. If the user, maybe instead of asking for their name, we could say, what's your age? And then maybe we should even change the name of our variable. I'll switch it to age. It'll work the same way, but usually the the user is going to type in, oh, what's your age? I'm only 2,804 years old. It will take that and it will print it like normal. But the issue is, if I want to say something like age plus 7, and I'll say like, age in 7 years, and you can make a variable name like this, right? That's fine. There's going to be an issue here. So if I type this and I say, what's your age, right? I said I'm 2,800. Oops, not, it's hard to count the years when you're this old. It's going to give you an error because like we said before, I'll go there in a moment. It's saying I cannot put a string and an integer together. Age right now on line 5, whenever a user types an input, it holds onto it as a string. And here on line 5, I'm trying to combine a string with a integer. 7 is the number 7. The age that I typed in, even though I typed in 2,804, it's holding onto it as a string. So just to show what's going on there is when we type this in, it's kind of like what we had over here, right? So when I typed in the 2,804, it's not holding it as this number. It's holding it as just these 4 symbols, the 2, an 8, a 0, and a 4. Because it defaults to holding it as a string, it doesn't put any value to this. It doesn't see it as a number. It's just a collection of a couple symbols together. Now, there's a thing called typecasting, which lets you tell Python, hey, I know that you're holding on to this as one type or another, but actually I want you to try and convert it to this other type. And whenever it can do that conversion, it will do it. So here, I could say, hey, I know that we got age from an input, so that's going to default to string. And I might even say that, so let me put a little comment here, like getting age, but I know it's a string. I'll just put str for string because we're going to run out of space. What you can do here is I can say, hey, I know that on this line, I want to use it as an integer so that I can do some addition. So I can say int, this is a new command in Python that we talked about today in class. I can say, hey, I'm going to convert that whatever age is holding on to, I'm going to tell Python, I know it might be a string or something else, turn it into an integer for me so I can do some work with it. And now when I run it, it will not give me an error. Now, if we want to print it out, nice. If we want to print it out, I could just print out age in 7 years. And now when I run this, 2,804, it would say, oh, I'd be 2,811 in 7 years from now, right? So this is the basics of typecasting. Is if you know something's going to be a particular type, you can always say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to say int and then parentheses and close parentheses. I want to change it to an integer. Or you can always say, hey, I actually want to turn it into a string. Or you can say, I want to turn it into a float. And this really becomes important when you're getting input from the user, but you want to store it as a number. Now, instead of doing this every single time, because let's say I wanted to get like age in 2 years, well, I would need to say, and let me fix this back to, we had it as integer. I would have to say int age again plus 2. And every time I did it, because age is still being stored as a string, it's still being stored in quotes. Every time I interact with it, I'm gonna have to typecast it to an int. If you don't want to deal with that and you know that the variable you're using, you always want to have it be a number, at the very start, you could say, hey, I know you're giving me input, and I want everything inside of these parentheses here, starting from int parentheses, ending at that parentheses over there. Whatever they put in as their input, I want to hold on to it as an integer. So now age is going to be holding on to an integer value. So if we do this, I can get rid of the typecasting in the line where I'm doing the math, and instead I can say, hey, I know that whatever they type in, because I put it inside of this int command, I'm going to hold on to it as an integer. So now age is an integer instead of a string, a collection of characters. So let's try it out here. And it still works, right? It still works, but we only have to convert it to an integer once over here. Yeah, let's go to the next part. So the next part is, it can get a little frustrating, but let's say in this program, instead of just typing age in 7 years, I want to say you will be age in 7 years, and then on the next line I'll say, or maybe I'll do this on the line above. I'll say in 7 years, ... Next line, you will be age in 7 years, and you'd hope this would be okay. Unfortunately, there's another issue. So let's see. 2,804 gives us an issue on line 10 because it says, all right, I cannot put a string and an integer together again. And so what's up with that? Well, on line 10, we have the string you will be, and then we have what is now an integer because age is an integer, and age plus 7 is going to stay as an integer, so age in 7 years is an integer. I have a string combined with an integer. So before we said, all right, well, a string and an integer, I can just cast this into an int. Problem is, there's no way to convert you will be into an integer value. It's not a number, right? Coming back over to the previous lesson where we talked about it, it can hold, the 3 data types that we know about are strings, integers, and floats. And while any integer and float can turn into a string because you just put quotes around it and it ignores the value, words and phrases and letters, they can't necessarily be converted to an integer because what does it mean for the word the to be an integer. How does that make sense? How does the sentence you will be, or the phrase you will be, how do I convert that to a word or to a number? So if I try to run this, it's going to give me another error because it's going to be like, I can't invalid something for int. I can't put you will be and convert it to an integer. So instead, we do know though that age in 7 years, you can convert anything into a string basically. So I couldn't combine a string with an integer. So I'm just going to say, hey, you know what, Python? We're going to pretend that this age in 7 years variable, we're just going to put it inside of a string. And then it'll be okay. So let's run it. What's your age? 2,804. So in 7 years, you'll be 2,811 years old. So just to recap, can I even see how long this video is going on for? No, I can't. So hopefully it's not a super long time. Just to recap, we so far have talked about 3 different data types. There are strings, which can hold, basically anything. It just holds on to symbols. We have integers, which hold on to whole numbers, and floats, which hold on to decimals. You can always convert from an integer or a float into a string, but when you do that, you can't do math with it anymore. It's just holding on to the symbols. And sometimes you can convert a string to an integer, just like when I typed in 2,804, it sees that and it's like, oh, I know how to convert that to a string. But if I tried to convert you will be, sorry, I know how to convert that to an integer. I think I misspoke there. But if I try to convert you will be into an integer, it's like, no, I can't do that. I don't know how to change that into a number. But you can always convert from a number into a string if you want to put it together and make a nice output like we had here. Yeah, I feel like this is just what I said in class today, but maybe getting to pause and rewatch it and repeat it is helpful. Please watch. I mean, I don't know. If you're at the end of the video, I guess you've already watched the video, so there's no point for me to ask you to watch it. If something's confusing, please don't be afraid to ask. Maybe send me an email before Tuesday if you're afraid to ask it in front of everyone. I feel like this was kind of confusing, so I hope that this cleared up the confusion, and if not, in class, we can talk about it and clear up confusion there. Yeah. Peace out. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. Enjoy.